I don't know. Say it with me. I don't know. Good God, it is liberating. I am a towering mountain of ignorance. I don't know. We're taught to believe that everything has a reason. Now, I'm glad that we have the desire to understand the world. That results in all sorts of great stuff. We want to know everything. We're humans. We're curious. And maybe it's our culture. Maybe it's just humanity. But I think a lot of the time we end up mixing up thinking something with knowing something. Suddenly, I know that I don't know. But somehow everyone else seems to know. They all know differently from each other, but they all seem to know. What I'm saying is nobody's opinions are correct in the world. And yet it's impossible not to tie your opinions to your concept of self. And often people tie those things so closely together that they begin defending their guesses as if they're defending their very lives. In a way, they are. This is why it can be so impossible to talk about certain topics with certain people. They've tied those suppositions to themselves so tightly with knots of narrative and constructed reality and values that there's just no untying it. And maybe unsurprisingly, in those situations, the best course of action is just to be friends. The world as we perceive it, as we've built it inside of ourselves, is a lie that we tell to ourselves, not out of deception, but out of necessity. We simply cannot understand the world as it is, and so we construct. But sometimes I just have to tell myself the thing that is definitely true, the truest thing I can say, which is that I don't know.
This is the Everyone's Agnostic Podcast with Bob Pondillo and Cass Midgley.
Well, it's amazing what those rose-colored glasses do. They do distort reality. What I felt like Christianity did to me or for me was that it overrided my own sense of agency. And so I didn't act in ways that I should have acted because I was relying on this invisible force or this invisible realm that was working behind the scenes. And so I couldn't trust what I saw. I had to trust something that I didn't see, that somehow was righting all the wrongs of my life.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 186 of the Everyone's Agnostic Podcast. I'm Cass Midgley. Today, Bob Pondillo and I interviewed Joy Hopper. She's the author of her own memoir called Joy Unspeakable, Toxic Faith and Rose-Colored Glasses. This is the quintessential EA episode. Joy's story is the story of many abused Christian women. And yet Joy shares this tragic story with the timbre of an upbeat college girl. Before we get into our talk with Joy, a word of caution to the ex-Christian men listening. If you even slightly built your marriage on the scriptures, this story is going to sting. Now, Joy's ex-husband, whose name is Troy, takes it to the extreme. But I found myself cringing when reading her accounts of the marriage in her book and during this interview. I can easily judge Troy and even hate him. But as I did, it had the familiar feeling of Troy reflecting back to me that which I hate about myself. You know, there's a Buddhist teaching that can help us understand Troy and ourselves, and even Joy. It's especially relevant in this time when the cultural scales of justice seem to be shifting in favor of the oppressed and a long overdue condemnation of the oppressors. What we're seeing these days, with all these tragic stories coming to the surface about men using their power to get women to do their bidding, and how that whole power dynamic steamrolls the woman's consent. This is not a black and white issue, it's a spectrum. This is why we're now seeing pushback in France against the potential for this to become a puritanical witch hunt. Or the most recent story with Aziz Ansari has given us some pause. The human mating ritual is awkward even for married couples who've had sex 5,000 times. It's always a little awkward, and neither party ever really knows how into it the other is until several risk-taking moves have been made to test the waters. Anyway, I want to talk about the spectrum of human behavior and emotional health as interpreted through the Buddhist teaching called the 8 worldly winds. It's 4 sets of 2 poles sitting opposite of each other. In between is a spectrum, and throughout our lives we are somewhere on that spectrum between the 2 poles. We constantly ebb and flow across it. The first of the two pairs is something we all want, and the second is something we all don't want. We all have a tendency to lust after the first thing and be afraid of the second. This model is a great map for understanding motivation in ourselves and in others. It teaches that every one of us, in our intention to move through this life, are affected by these 8 worldly winds that are constantly battering us. The first two are greed and lack. Every one of us has a desire to gain, to get things, and with that, a fear of losing or going without. Sometimes we operate from a place of greed, other times from a place of lack, and both are toxic for us and our relationships. The Buddhist aspiration is finding a balance and detach from both the greed for more and the fear of lack. The second pair of the 8 worldly winds is status and disgrace. Every one of us has a desire to be seen, to be known and respected, and with that comes a fear of disgrace or a fear of being ignored. The third is praise and blame. Every one of us thrives when we experience praise from others, and we fear blame. Lastly, pleasure and pain. Every one of us wants pleasure, and we have an aversion to pain. When we seek the former or flee the latter, we can live in an irritable, often depressed state, and it directly affects our relationships. When we reflect on conflict with others, it can be interesting to sense which one of these motivators is running really strong at that moment. I bring this up in the context of Joy and her husband because we'll see in Troy a deep need for status and thus a deep disdain for being ignored. If you too wrestle with these particular worldly winds, you may recognize yourself in Troy. This will likely disgust you with more fervor than others because it's so close to home for you. And I'm speaking from experience here. This brings up another pitfall. It's clear that Troy has a problem, his extreme need for power and the fear of his own weakness, but he will compound this problem if he also has a problem with having that problem. Here's how this works. Joy tells a story where they have a disagreement in the house. Joy's running late to run an errand and has to leave the house. Troy interprets this as Joy ignoring him. He's lost the status he craves, and he feels disgraced when she leaves him behind. He's feeling the pain and disappointment of this, so he storms out to the driveway, pounds on the window, and demands that she come back inside. "We're not finished with this conversation," he yells. But by now he's aware that he's out of control, and he doesn't like himself. He has scared the children in the car, and he's ashamed. The neighbors may be watching, and now he begins to hate himself for behaving this way. But it's too late. He's in over his head. His adrenaline is pumping. He's too invested and can't admit that he's made a mistake, because he not only has this problem, but he's embarrassed that he has it in the first place, let alone the unseemly behavior. He needs help, for sure, but the challenge for any therapist he visits is that they will likely have to build him up before they can break him down. They're going to have to firm up his self-esteem before he can really deal with his own issues. If he looks into the mirror and sees the monster, he will repel because he has a problem with having a problem, and instead of owning it, he will deny it and distance himself from it, digging yet a deeper hole than he had when he walked in the office. His therapy will take weeks, months, even years, just so he has time to get a strong enough self-esteem that when he sees the monster in the mirror, he will not recoil. He can have compassion on himself. The Buddhist theory of 8 worldly winds, this theory of having a problem with having a problem, help me when I see someone like Troy or Harvey Weinstein or Donald Trump for that matter, and I see a reflection of myself. Obviously, my first reaction is disgust. It can easily turn into self-hatred, which is not helpful. But if I can know that while, yes, I'm on the same spectrum as these assholes, I'm not necessarily in the same spot on the spectrum. But just having this awareness can help me move along the spectrum in a way that is less like these monsters. Now, I'm not a hardcore Harry Potter fan, but one of the movies was on in the background at my house the other day, and I stopped to watch it. I learned from that section of the movie that Voldemort, which is the kind of the evil character in the series, a part of him is inside Harry. It made me think that a part of Donald Trump is inside me. Now, before you vomit, consider this. One sure way that we can make the world a better place, improve society, mitigate wars, and promote world peace is to begin to see ourselves connected to one another, even those who disgust us, especially those that disgust us. To demonstrate this, here's a clip from the movie Harry Potter where Harry talks with a character called Sirius.
I was always welcome at the Potters. I see so much in you, Harry. You are so very much alike.
I'm not so sure. Sirius, when I saw Mr. Weasley attacked, I wasn't just watching. I was the snake. And afterwards in Dumbledore's office, there was a moment when I wanted to... This connection between me and Voldemort. What if the reason for it is that I am becoming more like him? I just feel so angry all the time. And what if after everything that I've been through, something's gone wrong inside me? What if I'm becoming bad?
I want you to listen to me very carefully, Harry. You're not a bad person. You're a very good person who bad things have happened to. You understand? Besides, the world isn't split into good people and Death Eaters. We've all got both light and dark inside of us. What matters is the part we choose to act on. That's who we really are.
Former guest of this podcast and host of the NPR program On Being, Krista Tippett, tweeted this week regarding the intense racist climate fostered by Donald Trump, quote, "The spiritual danger in a moment like this is that we orient so passionately towards what we reject that we mirror it, amplifying its energy and its ethos." Dr. King said, quote, "Hate is too great a burden to bear," unquote. He modeled a strong, demanding love, even as he battled hate. One of the 32 declarations of healthy adulthood by David Rico says this, "Until I see another's behavior with compassion, I have not understood it." The danger of seeing another's behavior with judgment is that, ironically, before you know it, you become what you hate. So when I see disgusting behavior, like I do in this episode with Joy's ex-husband, I let myself feel as much disgust as my mind and body decides it merits. And I know that if not for higher love, understanding, and compassion, there go I. I see the evil, feel it in my body. I don't judge myself for feeling it, and I don't judge the person for doing it. I see it, assess it for what it is, and try to get in touch with some compassion for that person. Because the truth is, while I may be more self-aware or more disciplined or whatever than that person at this moment, at a primal level, I am not superior to them. And under the same circumstances as their life, I would do the exact same thing. This is another way we benefit from saying yes to what is, to that which we cannot control. Our guest today, Joy Hopper, was adopted at the age of 3 into a devout Christian home. And the faith she inherited there worked for almost 50 years. She believed it, preached it, wrote songs about it, lived it. Jesus was the center of her universe, literally and metaphorically. Most of my listeners will be able to imagine the tsunami that followed when her ironclad theological foundation unexpectedly and involuntarily collapsed with a deafening thud. Her narrative chronicles her experiences of indoctrination from a young child to the present, as viewed through her rose-colored glasses. From early neglect to domestic violence, she shares how her distorted lens of faith turned every obstacle into an object lesson. and every injustice into a refining tool. She exposes the toxicity of a religion that promises unspeakable joy amidst the backdrop of terror and violence. Joy offers hope to others who, like her, have found the courage to walk away and discover the world is even more beautiful without the enhanced overlay of religion. We taped this conversation with Joy Hopper on January 14th, 2017.
We interview people you don't know about a subject no one wants to talk about. We hope to encourage people in the process of deconstructing their faith and help curb the loneliness that accompanies it. We think the world is a better place when more people live by sight, not by faith. Please subscribe to our podcast and leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts.
Also, you can support us monetarily in two easy ways. You can pledge a monthly gift through Patreon. That's patreon.com/EA Podcast. Or you can leave a lump sum donation through PayPal at our website, everyone'sagnostic.com. The smallest contribution is greatly appreciated. Our opening monologue is an excerpt from a YouTube by Hank Green. The music behind it is Never Know by Jack Johnson. The segue music on this episode is the rhythm track of a song called Black Tambourine by Beck. Thank you for listening, and be a yes-sayer to what is. Okay, our guest today is Joy Hopper. Welcome, welcome, Joy.
Yes. Welcome, Joy. Yay.
Thank you. It was a long time coming with all the technical difficulties this morning. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. It happens.
You're here. Yeah, absolutely.
We're happy to have you. My story with you, I don't know how we originally contacted each other, if you reached out to me or if I reached out to you. Do you remember?
I think you reached out to me because I had posted something on Facebook about a memoir that I was writing.
Yeah. I'm not sure how I would have seen that if we weren't already friends, though.
I think it was on one of the closed groups where we were mutual.
Okay. Are you on Life After God?
Yes.
Okay. That's probably where I saw you then.
Yeah.
And I reached out to you. You sent us a copy of the book. It's called Joy, Unspeakable, Toxic Faith, and Rose-Colored Glasses. And I really enjoyed reading it. I was moved several times, and I think it's really well written. You're funny. Mm-hmm. You're candid. It's just... Honestly, I really highly recommend the book to people that are on this kind of journey. So let's just start at the beginning, Joy. You went. How'd you end up in the foster system?
Well, first, thank you so much for your kind comments about my book. That just almost makes me want to cry, but thank you. So to your question about the foster system, my family of origin was pretty dysfunctional. My mom left when we were little, and there were 5 kids. I have a twin sister, and we were the babies. And she just couldn't handle the situation because my dad was a pretty serious alcoholic. And so she had intended to take us with her, but she just couldn't make ends meet and try to take care of us at the same time. So we were living with our dad, just waiting for the time that she could come for us. But in the meantime, my dad got arrested on a DUI. He was a severe alcoholic. And so there's no caregivers in the home. We all end up in foster care. Wow. And we ultimately just never went back home. So we were in that foster home for a couple of years, and they were the ones who graciously adopted us.
So you were how old at this point?
We were 3 years old.
Okay.
Wow.
And I understand from the book that as children, you never saw your siblings again.
Your brothers, anyway.
Right. It was pretty abrupt. It was, just these social workers show up, pull up in a car. Yeah. We get in, my sister and I get in one car. Our brother, who's a year older, gets in another car. And there's no closure. There's no goodbye. And so, it left a pretty unsettling feeling for us as we grew older and started kind of piecing things together.
3 years old. My gosh.
But it sounds like from the book that they were a good family. They happened to be deeply Christian, but other than that, they were good people, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
They really were. They were kind. I mean, there was no doubt that my mom wanted us and loved us. And she certainly did the best she could with the information she had, and she was a typical parent like most parents of that generation.
Now, when you say your mom, you're talking about your adoptive mom.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Have you ever made contact with your biological parents?
Yeah, I did. And that was a real healing piece for me.
Yeah.
Because there were so many unanswered questions growing up, and I tended to fill in that unknown with my own storyline. And I got to meet them when I was 22 years old. And just before I was about to get married, it was a month before my wedding. And I was reunited through a phone call with one of my birth brothers. And it was through that conversation that I met both my biological parents on my wedding day, actually.
Wow.
Gee whiz.
That's a lot in one day.
I'll say. Wow.
That was a lot. I'd often kind of joked saying that was the biggest day of my life because I had gotten married, met my birth family, and lost my virginity all in one fell swoop.
So other than the phone call, though, have you ever met with them face to face, your brothers included?
Yes, we did. So what had happened was there was one of my brothers put an ad in the newspaper from the town that we were born in, just hoping that we had been adopted somewhere in that area, which we had. We were adopted about 30 miles away.
Yeah.
And the little ad said, "Brother seeking information concerning twin sisters, Joy and Jill, family separated in 1965. If you know their whereabouts, call Steve Collect." Wow. And it was through that little ad. Somebody had seen that ad, had given it to my adoptive parents. Because, there's only so many sets of twins named Joy and Jill in a little rural,
Sure.
community,
And what state was this?
This was in Idaho.
Okay. Well, this is pre-internet. So this is what you did. You put an ad in the paper.
Sure.
Exactly. And I was really nervous, but I called my twin sister and asked her to make the call first because she was the braver of the two of us. And so she made that initial contact with my brother, Steve.
Yeah.
He was absolutely, he was just beside himself. He was weeping. He said his whole life, he had been looking for us and it was just such a hole in his own heart when we were all split up because, he was kind of our caregiver, he and our brother Matt, since my dad just wasn't really able to care for us. And so it was a lot for him when the family dissolved. But through that conversation, he called me instead of me having to call him because my sister gave him the number. And so he called me. And then after we were done talking, my brother Matt called me. We talked for, quite a while. And then after that, my third brother that they had found the year before, who had also been adopted out, he called me. And so it was just this amazing reunion over the phone. Then a few weeks later, I get a call. I'm in college and I get a call in my dorm room and it's my birth mom, Lily, who said that she had heard that we had been found. And it was just this wonderful, cheerful communication, the first communication that I had ever had with my birth mom.
Wow. And Joy, you weren't angry? You weren't like, yeah, now you're calling, Mom? What's going on here? If you hadn't left, things might have been better. But you were cool with it, huh?
Well, a part of my personality is just always rooting for the underdog, very optimistic. Huh. I had no animosity whatsoever. And I think probably because I felt like I deserved whatever happened in my life. And so it was nobody else's problem or issue. It was, I was kind of the unworthy one. So the fact that she even reached out and called me, I was like, I felt undone, so grateful that she would reach out to me,
Wow. Yeah. But you're 3 years old. You haven't done anything yet.
I know.
What? Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Isn't that something?
I think part of that Christian training that you're not worthy of anything. You're just, there's that sense of nobody could possibly love you, and God doesn't even love you. He says he loves you, but he only loves you if Jesus is in your heart, because he loves the Jesus in you, So I think that kind of played into it, just a real profound sense of unworthiness.
Yeah, low self-esteem, which made you a prime candidate for, the gospel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. So just to answer the question, did I meet them personally? I was getting married the next month in Idaho on New Year's Eve, and they all wanted to come, and we had a family reunion on the day of my wedding in Idaho. Everybody was coming from different places, so the only time that it turned out that we could meet was on my wedding day.
Yeah.
And they all came to my wedding, and I had subsequent visits with them throughout the years, and I got to be by my birth mom's bedside when she passed away a few years ago.
I understand your experience with the church that your foster or your adoptive parents raised you in was pleasant. It was a home and it was a community and
Yeah.
Yeah, I had really positive memories of being in the church.
yeah.
And part of it was because of, I think it met this social, emotional need
Yeah.
for me. And once again, just the doctrine of the church is like, it's always this division of us against them. There's the sheep and the goats and the wheat and the shaft. And so I really had this very suspicious view of everyone outside of my circle. Like they couldn't be trusted. They were influenced by the devil. And then there's also that teaching that we're supposed to be in the world, but not, air quote, of
The world.
the world. And so my only tribe was my church. It was the only place where I didn't feel like an oddball, where I fit in.
And you were actually kind of special because you were the two adoptive twins, probably cute as a bug, and the church could feel, and the family, could feel good about helping orphans. That's widows and orphans is the work of the church. And so you were kind of a trophy of that fulfillment.
It is so true. It's exactly how that played out in my own heart. I mean, this was a really sweet and special place to be.
So as you grow up in the church, even to this day, let's just ask if your adoptive parents, you still have a good relationship with them?
Well, my mom has since passed away, but I
Okay.
do have a good relationship with my dad.
Okay. And I noticed in the book that you have not told him that you're no longer a believer because you don't want to hurt him.
Exactly.
Okay.
That will be something that he will go to his grave never knowing, hopefully.
Yeah. Well, all right. So you're raised in the church. At what point you go to college? Where do you go to college?
Well, I went to this little tiny podunk college in North Dakota, and it was affiliated with the Assemblies of God. It was called Trinity.
Okay. Did you finish? Did you complete your degree?
Yeah, I went there for 4 years, got my degree in biblical studies, but of course, everybody goes there to get their MRS degrees.
Yeah.
So yeah, I got my degree and my husband out of it.
Okay. You met him at college.
Yes.
How'd that go?
That's a very good question. If you were to look at it just externally, it seemed like we were the ideal couple. I mean, here we were, both had this vision for ministry and reaching the lost. We were Christians. Our names rhymed, and in the spiritual world, everything is a sign. Like everything is kind of that fleece you put out before God. And so our rhyming names was this.
Was his name Roy?
Like
Troy.
For me,
Troy.
it was this sign that we were meant to be together.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I was just listening yesterday on NPR, and they had a guy on there that was talking about this very thing. And it kind of goes back to the meaning-making, storytelling, pattern-seeking nature that we all have.
Right.
And if you met somebody, like say my birthday's March 6th, and if I met somebody who was June 6th or August 6th, like the 6th,
Yeah.
or that our names rhymed,
Yes, that means something.
it was meant to be. There's...
Exactly.
Yeah. And
That's
especially when you're credulous like a Christian is,
Yes. And I mean, I laugh. It's like just a major face palm when I think back on it. But those, those really were factors in my decision to be with this person.
Yeah. So what about Jill? Are you still in contact with your twin sister?
Yes, I am. And we went to Idaho to visit my dad for his 87th birthday just a few months ago. And I wasn't going to tell my sister either that I had deconverted, but the way the conversation was going it was a very long car ride. It was like, 10 hours or something in the car. And she's talking to me as if I'm still a believer. And there's no offense here, but just pro Trump and just pro all the stuff that I'm so against right now. And there was just a point when she would say, you know what I mean? You know what I mean? And I just was biting my tongue because I didn't know what she meant. I couldn't
relate,
identify with her anymore. And so I had to have this, at one point in the conversation, I just had to say that I'm an agnostic and that's actually a good thing. It just means I can't claim to know what I know and stuff. And she was really quiet, and it shut down the conversation until we were coming back from the trip. And then there's all this kind of pent up stuff I think she was holding back, and she felt so terrible that I wasn't a believer, and she cried because I'm going to go to hell. And I don't know, it was just it was awkward. But in the end, she said she loved me and, would be praying for me and everything. And so I think that's probably strained our relationship at this point, because we are on different wavelengths now with the way that we see the world.
Isn't that something? So if you're an evangelical Christian, then you inherit these notions of like the Trump notion. I mean, you just go ahead and embrace all this stuff, apparently.
It does seem to be part and parcel.
It's weird, isn't it?
No, it's just so true. If you just look at Fox News for 5 minutes, they're giving a completely different account of everything that's happening in the world. And that's, the Christians tune into Fox News. And so they're getting a perspective that most of the world doesn't share, but it's sure real to them.
Wow. It's just an alternate universe.
Alternate reality. Yeah.
Yes.
It's sad when we all have, I have siblings that are there and everything, but I don't know. There's probably something even deeper when it's your twin.
Yes.
Yeah.
I didn't want to disappoint her. It was the hardest thing in the world to say that, I don't think the same way that I did before.
Yeah.
And it's so hard for that to come out of my mouth, because she's my sister and I love her and I don't want her to feel bad. I don't want her to worry about my soul.
Mm-hmm.
So you get married at age 22, right?
Exactly. Yep.
And you met your husband in college, and you were, did you wait till you were finished with college, or were you both still in classes and such?
Yeah, we went through the 4 years, and then we'd been dating that our senior year and broke up, and then kind of got back together again just at the very end of the school year. And he went on to go to seminary to get his master's, an MDiv, Master of Divinity. Mm-hmm. And before we'd broken up, I had decided to take some extra classes at another university in that same town where my husband was going to get his MDiv. And again, those were the signs that we were supposed to be together, because post-college we were heading to the same city for different reasons. But he proposed to me just before we started our own classes again in Missouri.
So how did you pay the bills all this time?
When we first started out, when we got married, I was working at a restaurant and he was working at a shoe store or something. Yeah. In the mall, and we're both going to school at the same time.
You give a very candid account of your honeymoon. And for the believer, this is a big deal. You've been waiting. You've been saving yourself. Oh. And in a way, it kind of creates expectations. It kind of creates pressure for this to go well.
Lots of stress.
And I think I'll let the listener or the reader read the details. But in general, like at one point, the story I really love is that you think, all right, I've heard about this, people taking baths together. And so you say, all right, let's do this. And so it's going to be this bubble bath. It's going to be sexy. It's going to be fun. And you disrobe for the first time in front of anybody, probably than your twin sister. And his reaction was disappointing.
Oh, geez.
Yes. Well, it was. I think that was the first sign that maybe this really was a mistake, because he showed such disinterest or just apathy, and I felt embarrassed and rejected, and it was just the first, like I said, just that first sign that, okay, things aren't going well. We're just a few days into our honeymoon, and already there's no interest sexually.
Yeah, so when I read that, I thought, he's gay.
Yes.
Really? And he was he?
Well, he still proclaims to be a believer. Well, in some circles, and some circles not. So I'm not really sure where he stands, but I don't think that's something that he would even be able to face about himself. He's very, very repressed in that way. Yeah. I think most people that have met him over the years, and this is over a broad spectrum, people forever have asked me, is he gay? And so he's putting out vibes for sure.
Yeah.
But I don't know if he may be the last person to realize it.
Yeah. Well, he's not a very self-aware person. Now, he turned out to be very patriarchal, and I wear the pants, and you're the submissive wife.
Yep.
But that's pretty standard, though, isn't it? I mean, that's the way it's supposed to be, right?
Yeah, and we were trying to be as biblical as we could in this relationship, and it did seem to fit with our theology.
All the way down to where he wouldn't let you drive the car.
Right. Yeah, there were a lot of just such hurtful moments, and just the way it all played out. And I mean, I know there are many husbands that are misogynistic and very patriarchal, but the way that they, treat their spouse is still loving. And so he kind of had that patriarchal bent, but also a very unloving bent as well, that the way that he responded was incredibly hurtful.
And he had anger management issues, it seemed like.
Yeah, very much. So he was aware that he had anger issues, and it was part of the discipling process that he went through for years and years and years through the church. Lots of Bible study and books that he read, and a lot of accountability for it, but it didn't help him very much.
No kidding. Did he strike you? Did he physically? I mean,
yes, he did. This was early in the marriage. We had moved from Missouri, and we were looking for a new seminary for my husband to attend, and we had been traveling. This was like a 2 or 3 month traveling across the United States and sleeping in a tent and so forth. We were en route to California for my husband to go to Fuller Seminary.
Oh, right.
But en route, we were only maybe a few days into our trip, and the speaker on my side of the car was kind of blocked because we were carrying all of our earthly belongings cross country. And I turned the radio up a little bit because I couldn't hear it, and he immediately turned the radio down, and I said, "Oh, I'm just going to turn it up a smidge. I can't hear it." And he just hauled off and just slapped me in the face right there in the car, and told me in no uncertain terms that I was not ever allowed to touch the radio dial again. It was shocking. It was, I was like, okay, this is how it's going to be. It was like I wanted to be submissive, but I knew that wasn't okay for him to hit me. So I said, that was really uncalled for. I'd really like you to apologize. And he refused. And he said I had it coming. I deserved it. And so I just decided I wasn't going to talk to him until he apologized. I was going to at least stand my ground in that way. And so we get to the campsite that night, and I don't go into the tent, and he just, in a very mockingly way, just, unzips the tent, throws a pillow out, and zips it up again. Still nothing said. I'm left there, so just alone and devastated. I'm newly married. We're thousands of miles from anyone that we know, and I'm just feeling so lost and sad, and
say angry.
Thinking, wow, this is what I got myself into.
You had to be angry, didn't you? I mean, I just can't imagine. Well, now, I mean, after all these years, I guess you could go, oh, that was weird. But you had to be like hurt and mad, and you didn't you? Maybe not.
Yeah, it was. It was hurt and mad. I just felt so misunderstood in that, and wow. The next morning, it was still quiet. He still didn't say a word.
Wait, you slept out?
I didn't say a word. And we're driving for quite a ways down the road. And finally, he breaks the silence. And he says, so I know you're expecting an apology from me. So I'm sorry for living. I'm sorry for breathing. I'm sorry for everything in the world there ever is to be sorry for. There. Are you happy? So that was his apology. And, wow. And this is where, in my memoir, I write about these rose-colored glasses, and I needed those glasses to be able to see what God was doing in these painful situations. It was kind of like this Pollyanna overlay to these struggles, and so I'm trying to get God to tell me how to respond to this, and so I'm interpreting it as, well, God is just teaching me to be more submissive, and He's refining my character, and so I didn't want to accept it, but I felt like he apologized, even though it was the most sarcastic and it wasn't genuine. He still said words, and so therefore I would accept his apology. And I did that throughout my life and throughout the marriage, just put on those special rose-colored glasses to find a different interpretation of what was happening in this physical realm and trying to find something good out of it.
Yeah, and this is where the whole notion of take up your cross daily and follow me. This is your cross to bear. And
yes.
And you will take shit off people, and you will stay in an abusive marriage and a dead end marriage. And actually, knowing what we know now, that there is no compulsion to get married, to stay married. In reality, those are all imposed by the society, the culture, and largely driven by religion. Because otherwise, we're just people that don't want to be alone. We find somebody, and almost every relationship has a shelf life. And instead of having the freedom to say, hey, we've grown apart, let's go our separate ways and stay respectful and do it mature adults or whatever, there's these outside forces. Because as I'm reading this book, Joy, I'm just cringing with why and how you stay. And then you have, even at the point where I'm thinking, run, get out, you have a kid. And I'm like pulling my hair out. And then you have another kid. And you ended up with 6 kids, am I right?
Yes.
From this guy, right. From the same fella, from the same man.
Yeah.
All his kids. Wow.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing what those rose-colored glasses do. They do distort reality. What I felt like Christianity did to me or for me was that it overrided my own sense of agency.
Yeah.
And so I didn't act in ways that I should have acted because I was relying on this invisible force or this invisible realm that was working behind the scenes. And so I couldn't trust what I saw. I had to trust something that I didn't see, that somehow was righting all the wrongs of my life.
Yeah.
Wow.
So now, if all 6 kids were your biological kids, right? You didn't do any adopting.
Well, 4 of the children were biological, and then we adopted our little 2 cabooses.
Okay. So talk about them. Were they special needs children?
No, they are the most amazing kids. They're 15 and 16 now. And they were just victims of a terrible situation. They're from Los Angeles. Their mom was addicted to meth, and she just couldn't get free from it. She voluntarily gave her kids up because she knew she couldn't take care of them. They were taken from her when the second of the brothers was born because he tested positive in his own system for meth. And they were in the foster care system for 3 years, and they were about to be adopted. All the parental rights had been severed, but then that family unit dissolved and they ended up back in the system. So by the time we went through that process to adopt, they were just primed and ready. We did the fostering and the adopting process simultaneously. So instead of maybe a 1-year process, we were able to condense it to 6 months. Mm-hmm. And so we got them relatively quickly.
How old were they when you got them?
The youngest was 3 and his brother was 4.
Mm-hmm.
The same age that my sister and I were when we were adopted. And it kind of felt neat to be able to, it was like
another sign.
The circle. Yeah. Yep. Exactly. Another sign. Right.
So your husband all this time was aspiring to be a minister. He was getting his MDiv, and he ended up with some associate pastoral jobs, right?
Yes, he had always wanted to be a minister, and he was given different opportunities within the church as a care group leader or a Sunday school teacher, and occasionally some type of administrative positions, but he was always in training. And there was a point where the domestic abuse happening in the home finally kind of caught up to him, and the pastors realized he wasn't a good fit for ministry, and they didn't offer him any more opportunities.
Wow. So Joy, the abuse continued. He kept slapping you or hitting you, or? It
was mostly emotional and verbal abuse, although there were still other incidences where he was physically violent. But he tried really hard to overcome those tendencies, but he just couldn't help himself in terms of being really controlling and emotionally abusive. And so one of the turning points that pretty much disqualified him from any future ministry ventures was, as an example, so we were homeschooling our kids, and he decided to telecommute rather than go to an office. And we already lived in a small house with 4 young children. The oldest is 7. The youngest is 2 or 3. And, I kind of needed that space in the house. I didn't really need him to be there taking up another room and demanding that everyone stay quiet all day while he talks on the phone. So it was I didn't think it was a good fit, but he didn't want to have to drive, 20 minutes away to work. And so he pretty much took over the house, and it was a real disruption of our life, but we accommodated in every way that we could. And so I set up a homeschooling room in our garage so it would be kind of off the, out of earshot, and it wouldn't interfere with his calls. And he was very clear that when he was home, he would never watch the kids or do anything with the kids because it was his work time. But those rules applied only to me, and he was very flexible with everyone else and anybody that dropped by and stuff. And it was just kind of this misunderstanding. But one day I needed to take one of my daughters to her homeschool co-op, and my oldest daughter was still in the garage finishing up, some work. She was completely fine. He didn't need to do a single thing with her, but I just peeked into his office and said, I'm going to just run one daughter, to her class. I'm going to leave. I'll just say her name. It's okay. I'll leave Kinsey here. She just finished up her work. You don't have to do anything. I just wanted you to know she's there. And that was just the wrong thing to do, since he had been explicit that he was not to babysit the kids. And in my mind, I was thinking, he's not babysitting. She's independently working. But, you can see where it's, he was upset about it. And so then I immediately backtracked when I saw that he was upset. I said, oh, no worries, never mind. And I just ran and grabbed Kinsey and I said, don't worry about it. Just come with me. We'll work it out later. But he followed me out to the car and tells me that this conversation isn't over, and to get back into the house. So he's, doing that control thing where he's getting out of control. I'm visibly scared because when he gets that way, I just don't know what's going to happen. He's unpredictable. And the kids are all loaded up in the car, and I just mouth, sorry, I've got to go. I've got to get the child to the co-op. And he was so angry. He starts slamming on the back of the window, and all the kids start crying. It's really scary. And I'm terrified only because I know I've disobeyed him. He told me to stay, that this conversation wasn't over, and here I'm leaving. And you just don't disobey your husband. It's just not okay. But in that moment, it was like, I had to, I just wasn't I was too scared to stay and engage with him.
Wow.
So I, take the kids to their co-op, and I know that there's going to be trouble when I get home, and he's waiting for me at the door when we show up. It's a terrifying thing. I mean, even when I say it now, I feel like my heart's kind of palpitating a little bit, because It wasn't that he was physically abusive, but there was so much control that he was so controlling that it was terribly scary.
Yeah.
But he holds me hostage. We come in, he demands that I sit on the couch, and I immediately tell the kids, go outside and play, guys. And he says, no, they are not going to go outside. They're going to sit here and they're going to listen to this. So he's demanding that these scared little children listen to him berate me for, I don't even know how long it was. It could have been hours. Wouldn't let me off the couch. And the kids run to me for me to hold them, and he won't let them sit near me. So he leaves me completely isolated on the couch, as all the other children on the other side of the room by him, and he's standing and he's looking down, talking to me. So I'm just trying to paint a picture of just how oppressive that was. And as the children are listening, he's telling them that I'm an unfit mother, that I'm as bad as the mom next door who's a drug dealer and lets her kids run out in the street, and all of these things. And that was his way to control me, because he knew the thing that I loved more than anything was to be a mom, and I was a very attentive, and I was a mom, but he's using that to punish me. And so that's what I mean. That type of abuse happened over and over again, even though the physical abuse was very sporadic.
And he wants to be a pastor. That's the thing that just blows my mind. I mean, it's so disrespectful. How dare anybody do that to another person? You don't do that. Where does that come from? I'm sure it comes from the church. It comes from the Bible or something.
Yeah, there was such a disconnect between his desire for good and to do good, and then his actual behavior. And I think he hated himself for the way that he behaved. But what was so sad in that story, the pastors said, that I think this is the end. We're going to release you from this kind of this internship. We feel like you don't really have what it takes to be a minister because of your, your bedside manner. And this is the first time I saw him cry. I mean, he actually hugged me and he was crying, and I was thinking maybe there was some remorse for the way that he had behaved, but he was only sad that he felt misunderstood by the pastors, that he really should be a pastor and they just didn't understand him. He had no remorse whatsoever for the way that he had treated me, the way that he had really emotionally harmed the children by it's still traumatic to our kids this day. If you mention that scene, it's upsetting to them. It was a terrible moment. He didn't show any remorse for that. He didn't see that he had done anything. Yeah. Only sad that the pastors didn't think he was qualified to be a minister.
So one of the chapters is called Damaged Goods in Joy, your book. And I'm just going to read an excerpt from it. It became obvious that the trauma over the years had taken its toll. One can't be reviled for years without being emotionally and psychologically damaged. For the first 15 years, I had slept on the far edge of the bed, just as I had been trained, and had kept a safe distance so as to not smother. For 15 years, I saw myself as inferior, unworthy of intimacy, sexually repulsive, and incapable of being loved by a man. I remember watching romantic movies and having no schema to draw from to understand the loving and playful exchange. I had never felt it or experienced it, and I even tensed up when the lovers on screen would have sex. Why wasn't she fearful and cautious? Why wasn't she repulsed? How could she jump freely into his arms, and he spun her around, kissing her? For 15 years, I suppressed my desire for physical love and instead always sought to draw my attention and affection to Jesus. I had capped off every emotional pathway leading to intimacy as a protective coping mechanism.
Wow.
Tragic.
Mike, yeah, it is tragic. It's very sad. It makes me so sad to think that you had to go through that, dear. It really does.
Well, thank you for saying that.
Yeah. And I guess the point of the book as well is, and I'm not the only one. I mean, this is me, this is my story, but this is the story of others as well. That's the sense I'm getting. Do you know other people that have gone through the same kind of or similar kind of thing?
Yeah, I think it's so common and so much more common than we even maybe would realize. And it's interesting because I describe he's my ex-husband now, but as a narcissist. And I thought that was kind of a unique, like maybe that's a small subset of society. But as I talk to people, I feel like that's kind of the characteristic of so many people. And it really does affect relationships when you have that type of personality.
Yeah, and I can speak to this because I have claimed, some degree of narcissism because I just think so highly of myself or whatever. But there's been seasons of my life where that was a compensation for how much I actually hated myself. And so I think we can say that your ex-husband Troy hated himself, and Christianity created a space where that fostered that. Yeah. And that it was actually a good thing to hate yourself because, Paul beat his flesh into submission and you're not to trust your own heart or your own desires, and you forfeit your agency because it's evil and decrepit and there's no good in you. And so, I know in my own life that there were times when the notion of being the man of the house and wearing the pants appeals to that weak, insecure ego. And, you have to elevate yourself at the expense of others. And in this case, he did it at your expense. Yeah.
So how did you get out of this, Joy? What happened? What was the breaking point or the last straw?
I would have, if I had still stayed in Christianity, I would still be married. And so it really took me seeing the world through different eyes and looking at the evidence that I had or why I believed what I believed. When I took a closer look and that evidence failed me, it was every anchor that I'd held on to that seemed to dictate my actions. It just fell by the wayside. And it was like I was completely unhinged and unleashed to look at my situation, through a different pair of lens. Mm-hmm. And it was after my deconversion that I was able to really take stock of my life and ask myself, what is it that I really want? Because all the time in Christianity, it was never a question of what I want or what I need or what I desire, because I was supposed to always be dying to self. I must decrease and God must increase.
Right.
And with that mentality, it's like I was so divorced of my own feelings. I completely dismissed my own desires and wants because they were irrelevant. The only thing that was important is what God wants. And so when God got removed from the equation, it's just me, and I'm able to take an honest look and really think about what I want. And I was just looking at this relationship and realizing I am so miserable. I'm just really unhappy in this relationship. We walk on eggshells constantly. There's no real sense of true intimacy and love and whatever love or relationship is supposed to look like. I just couldn't see any signs of it. We were going through the motions, and so externally we would look really good, but in our heart of hearts, you would see that this wasn't a good thing. And so that was the point where I realized I don't have to stay in this marriage if I don't want to. And it was an incredibly empowering and terrifying, proposition. But
right.
I just started in the name of being authentic and caring for myself and my own needs. I made that very, very tough decision to let go of the marriage. We'd been together for 30 years.
Wow.
It was tough.
How did that manifest itself, though, tactically? What did you do? Did you have to get the kids and get them to another place, or did you do it over the phone? Did you do it in person? Did you have a cop next to you or something? I mean, how did it happen?
Well, he started a business in North Dakota during the oil boom in the Bakken. So he was out of the house for months at a time. And during the time that he was away, it felt so different at our house. And every once in a while, the boys would say, "When's Dad coming home?" And I would tell them, and they would be disappointed. I thought they were asking because they missed him, but they were just thinking how many more days of feeling good would it be before he came home? Because when he was home, he only would step out of his office to scold somebody. And all of us walked on eggshells. And so we had this unique opportunity because he's away to actually feel what it's like when he's not there. And we all preferred it. We loved it when he wasn't there. We dreaded it when he came. During those months that he's away, I have this life coach, and we're just talking through it and come to this point. And it's through lots of tears and everything that I come to this point that when the next time he comes home, we'll have a talk and I'll let him know that I want out.
I would be afraid. I tell you, I wouldn't do it alone. I would have somebody there with me. I'm not gonna get hit again.
It was terrifying.
Yeah.
When he came back, I didn't even know if I could go through with it, but I had rehearsed it many, many times for that event. And when he was in North Dakota, he was so completely uninvolved with the family. Never called our boys even once the whole time he was ever gone. I really felt like he was pulling away, and that was going to be his life. And when he did come back that last time, he said he was going to start 2 more businesses. It took a full year for this first business to start. And if he's starting 2 more, I'm just doing the math and thinking, he's gone for the next few years. It's over in his mind too, but he just would never say it. So I thought that maybe he'd be grateful that I'm kind of cutting him loose and he can just go do his business ventures, But when he came back, he was really distant and just rude to me, very quiet. I tried to go out to dinner with him, and it was like pulling teeth just to even get anything out of him. So it felt like there wasn't the time to tell him because he didn't even open a door. He didn't ask how I was feeling or how I was doing or how things were while he was away. He asked nothing of me or about me. And because he didn't open the door for that conversation, I thought, well, maybe I'll just write him a letter while he's away. Maybe that would be the easier thing. But I'm a nice person, and I thought something like that should be told face to face. Well, he had only been there for a couple of days, and we had this big, our annual neighborhood barbecue in our backyard because we have this really lovely backyard. I had to work that day. I was teaching school, and I had a list that I was hoping that he could take care of so that the party would be, underway when I got home. And he didn't see the list. There was no fault that he didn't see the list, but there was a lot to get done in a very short period of time. And I was talking to him kind of in this swift, just matter of fact, we got to get things done mode. And I wasn't couching everything with that submissive, honey, would you mind? Could you please? I was just being very direct. We need this, we need that. I'm running to the store. And he took great offense to that. And so the next morning, he said that I had treated him more horribly than I'd ever treated him in his life. And honestly, I don't even know what it was I said. It was just that he didn't appreciate the assertiveness with which I was trying to get all the details of the party underway. But that was an offense to him. I wasn't treating him with the respect that he deserved.
It really wasn't about the party. That's for sure. No.
It was about his own weakness.
Yeah.
Yes. And he jumps right from, you have never treated me so disrespectfully, to, he says, who are you fucking in my bed? So that was his jump from, honey, you weren't very polite. And he wouldn't say honey because he never used any sweet, pet names for me. But, he just jumped from, I didn't like how you treated me, to, you must be sleeping with someone else. I think that's where it was like the straw that broke the camel's back. It was like, I'm just done. If we can't even have the most basic of conversation of, you hurt my feelings or whatever it was, but to make such a drastic accusation, which showed such little trust for me.
Yeah.
When I had been 100% faithful my entire marriage, there was no reason he should have ever, ever, ever questioned that.
Yeah.
But he did. That's what he jumped to. So I thought, it is over. If this happens, we're done. And so I went upstairs because I knew he would follow me. I wanted out of earshot of my kids. And I just took a deep breath and told him that I loved him and I loved myself, but I didn't love us together. And I just couldn't see us continuing. And I let out a big breath and I realized I put it out there and I couldn't reel it back in.
Yeah. How was the reaction?
He was really stunned at first, and then he got angrier and angrier. And those next few weeks and months, he really was, kind of spiraling out of control. And I had to ask him to move out, and I changed the locks and everything. And this was at the insistence of my attorney and just anyone involved, because they could see that he was kind of spiraling out of control. And so I just had as little contact with him as I could. And I just wanted to cut my losses and get out of this relationship. And so my attorney wouldn't even sign off on the divorce because it was just so, it was so unfair financially, but the finances had no bearing on this in my eyes. I just needed it to be done. I needed him to be out. I needed to be able to move on with my life. And so we basically just text, and only when it has something to do with our kids.
Yeah. So is the standard you get nothing, he gets everything divorce, pretty much, huh?
Yeah. The way there was a lot of money involved because his parents had a lot of stake in the oil things in the Bakken. So we were recipients of large sums of money. And in the divorce, he gifted everything back to his family. So it would look like that he had nothing. And so it just looked like there was nothing to share or split.
What a piece of shit.
Yeah, he's a shitty guy.
And so
Nasty
when
man.
the divorce is over, he gets to go back and have everything, because he's connected to a wealthy family. But he didn't want to have to pay any, child support or, anything like that. So it was tricky and unfair. But I'm just glad it's done. I'm really so glad it's done.
So how long ago was it that you divorced?
It's been 2 years since the separation, and then that whole process lasted about 9 months or something like that. So I think it'll be a year or 2 years this coming July that we officially divorced.
And your youngest child is 15?
Yes.
Okay. And does he have him on the weekends or what's up?
He demanded to have him 50-50 time with the split so that he didn't have to pay any child support. And so he gets them 2 weeks out of the month. And so we just split. And when he has the boys, he's here. When he doesn't have the boys, he's back running his businesses.
So the two adopted boys are kind of being shuffled back and forth, but your elder 4 kids are on their own?
Yes, that's right.
All right. So the eldest daughter, she goes to Europe or for somewhere. She meets some people, and it really bugs her that these are good people without God, and they're going to hell. And it started to really eat at her. She comes to you and shares this, starts referring to Christians as they, scares you. You look into the concept and the doctrine of hell, right?
Exactly. Yep. That's exactly how it happened.
Well, that was the first straw for you then.
That was the beginning of the downward spiral for sure. I thought if she still believed in Jesus, that's all that was important. And if I could find a more palatable view of hell, that maybe she'd be okay still with Christianity. Maybe it didn't have to be this harsh version that we had always been taught. And when I started researching it just sent me down this rabbit trail of all kinds of other things like the inerrancy of scripture.
Yeah.
And that, the Bible was the number one pillar, from which all of my beliefs, were anchored to. And as I started researching just how the Bible came to be and all the problems with it, and I read some really great books that really shattered my my thinking about the Bible being completely God-breathed and inspired. And once that pillar fell, it was just all over. There was absolutely nothing left.
Yeah.
I saw where you're born in 61, right? So you're 56, 57?
Yes, 56, yep.
I have a friend, and he's a friend of the show. He's been a guest on the show. He's co-hosted on the show. His name's Dave Warnock. And
I know his name too.
Yeah, you might have heard his episode, but he's 61, I think 62, rebuilding his life. He did divorce his wife. His children won't let him be involved in their lives because he's an apostate. And you know what? He's pretty mad. He's pretty well set on, I've got lost time to make up for. Do you have any sense like that, Joy? Because I'm looking at your life and I'm really sad and sorry that it sucks.
Such a good person has to go through this.
And you walked right into it. It was almost a trap. You gave it your heart and soul. Turns out it was all not only invalid, but it kept you a prisoner of something that was otherwise toxic. You call it toxic faith, in your book, your subtitle. So where are you now as far as I want my life back and I want whatever remaining years I have, I want them to be good. I want them, not necessarily that they're going to compensate or make up for lost time, but what are you doing now to set your sights on a whole new thing?
That's such a great question. I am just so happy to be alive, and I'm so thrilled that I was able to take off those rose-colored glasses. Even though it's kind of late in the game, I feel like it's not too late. I still have so much to live for, and I have so many wonderful things that just make me happy to be alive. So I really focus on those things. I try not to focus on everything that I lost, and in some ways, having those, that Pollyanna type of personality, I can still look back and salvage a lot of good from my life. And, I learned things. I became who I am right now because of things, even though they were unfortunate. And I do grieve a lifetime of not really knowing love. You know what I mean? That part's really hard. And maybe I won't find it, fully, but, I'm open to all the possibilities, and I'm very optimistic. I love my teaching job and my students. I do distance cycling in the summer where I ride my bike hundreds of miles, across North Dakota or South Dakota or around Washington and stuff. And that, that's really fun. In the summer, I'm going to do a 500-mile walk in Spain, the Camino de Santiago, with two of my friends. And just things like that just make me so happy to be alive and keep my focus on what's ahead and not what has happened in my past.
Yeah.
So where do you, I mean, you leave the church, and the church was obviously your source of community. It was the subculture. You were homeschooling and such, and now you're out of that bubble. How do you find community?
I really missed that part of it. And when you're a Christian, your whole life is around the church, all of your social groups, everything, there were just so many little facets of my life that were connected to the church. And then suddenly I felt so alone in the world when I left that tribe. But I had read this book by Jerry DeWitt, and I can't remember the name of the book, but it was just so good. And he talks about how he was starting these groups called Sunday assemblies for people that had left the church but still wanted community. And so I was secretly researching this because when I deconverted, I was still married, and I felt like everything that I was doing was was kind of like looking at porn or something when you're, I don't know, like a teenager or something. I don't know. But I was trying to find another place to be. And the closest thing to Sunday assembly was the Unitarian Universalist church. And when my husband was out of town, I would go and try out this church. And I just loved it from the first day that I was there. I was scared to go because I felt like such an apostate, and they didn't pray and they didn't talk about Jesus. And it was like, it was the epitome of what in the church they would have said, this is clearly something from the devil, But
yeah,
I went there, and the words resonated with me because it was about social justice and compassion. And I thought those were things that anybody, whether Christian or not, should embrace, these humanistic values. Mm-hmm. And so I would just go whenever my husband was out of town.
Wow.
And that's the group that I belong to now. I don't attend every week because I love the freedom to not be bound to church on Sunday, but I go when I'm feeling like I need to connect.
Right. So, Joy, do you have love in your life? Do you have a love in your life?
Well, I mentioned this in my book, and this was a part. I think there's so many coming outs when you deconvert. You're coming out as a non-believer, and it's like just coming out of a cocoon, and you're this different person, and then it's sort of hard to face all of these coming outs of sorts. But back when I was talking about getting in touch with my own self and what I wanted, as opposed to what I believed God wanted, I think in that process, I began to question my own sexual orientation. All this time I was pretty clear that, I felt pretty confident that my husband was possibly gay, but I really couldn't see that in myself because, there's a lot of suppression going on.
Yeah.
But in that I was trying to honestly face me, and there wasn't so much at stake. I didn't have to worry about going to hell if I could be honest with myself. In that self-reflection, I thought, I really do prefer women, I think. And I was dating this woman, and she's my last word in my book, and we have since broken up and are still good friends. So she's not in my life romantically now, but I'm still, I'm so busy just with life that it's hard to take time to actually be in a relationship, but I'm certainly open to the possibilities.
Wow. Good for you.
So you mentioned, you mentioned a while back, you know what, Bob? We do need to stop and congratulate her.
Oh, absolutely.
This is amazing. I'm just so glad that you got out, that you're rebuilding your life. You picked up some hobbies. You're attending you're finding community. This is just beautiful. And it's so hard for me to say anything without condescending as a man, but I just, I'm just proud of you. I'm so proud of you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for saying that. That means the world to me, honestly.
And what's cool too, Joy, is that you've left this book behind for people to read and to think about and to examine their lives through the lens that you give us and stuff. And I have a question for you. Why do you call it Joy Unspeakable? Because it doesn't sound like it was very joyful at all. I realize it's from a song or a hymn or something, but why go there?
That is such a good question. And so it has a double meaning to it. And one, it was, I think that joy unspeakable speaks to those rose-colored glasses where I was able to look at all of life through this little rosy lens, because Christianity promised to have a corner on joy. I was always told that the only true joy we could ever experience is having a personal relationship with Jesus, and everybody else in the world would never be able to have that experience. I kind of relied on that and in a fake way created that sense of joy by a lot of cognitive dissonance and by, keeping those rose-colored glasses on. The second meaning of joy unspeakable is my name, Joy. And I try to talk about in this memoir those unspeakable things of Christianity that I had never really articulated until looking back and reflecting. It was like a rewriting of my life, looking at it in 2020 vision as opposed to this distorted lens. And some of those unspeakable things for me personally, joy, was the toxicity of this faith that on the outside seemed to be so benign and wonderful. The image that we have so often of Christianity is this picture of a very handsome Jesus sitting on a rock, and all these children are, sitting on his lap and he's hugging them. But behind the scenes, there's this doctrine of hell, which is just so horrifying. And then the rapture. Oh my God, the rapture. That is just, when you think about it, it's like you're constantly on eggshells waiting for the suspenseful something to happen. So you're on edge constantly. And this fucking God will not give you a heads up. He won't give you a warning. He's going to use the elements of surprise and basically kidnap you, And so there's that's what's kind of happening throughout, my entire childhood. I'm terrified of this thing called the rapture, even though it's supposed to be a good thing. It's terrifying,
Yeah.
When you least expect it. He's going to just snatch you up in the clouds.
Like a thief in the night.
And then the doctrine of the devil.
Yeah.
Yeah, like a thief. Like, why would he be a thief? Why can't he just tell you, if you're his chosen one, can't he just comfort you and tell you what's going to happen and what to do and it's all going to be okay? But no, he's going to sneak up on you to trick you so you may get left behind because you had a bad thought,
Yep.
Those are the toxic things that I want to speak about that were unspeakable.
Yeah, I get you.
And the devil is another horrible idea for a child.
Yep.
The fact that he's also sneaking around constantly. You have this enemy that's always 24/7 trying to trap you and try to keep you from following Jesus. What a horrible burden that, you have to bear. Always be on guard for this invisible force that you have no control over, who's trying to snatch you away from Jesus. Those are toxic thoughts and just very psychologically damaging.
I agree. Absolutely. 100%.
Horrifying. And this is the burden. Now, when you were saying that first part, when you're in the bubble, when you're in the cult, and the cult says, we have the corner on joy, and you've never even been outside the walls, then no matter how miserable you are, you can still assume that this is as good as it gets.
That's right. You think, I feel so sorry for everybody who doesn't know Jesus because this sucks right now,
they have it worse off.
Really bad for them,
Yeah, if it's bad in here, it's got to be really bad out there. What a lie.
Yeah. Wow.
So let's wrap it up with, we already talked about your hobbies. You're a cyclist, you're a teacher, and you're a musician. Like, you write songs and stuff, or have you transferred maybe some of those musical interests from being a theist to a non-theist?
I have had some fun. When I went to a women's retreat at the UU, I wrote this funny kind of parody type song that everybody loved, and was about being a Unitarian. And the idea was, what would it be like if Unitarians proselytized like other Christian churches did? And, the whole idea is that we don't read the Bible and we never pray, we don't speak in tongues or hate the gays, and so it's all the things that they don't do. And that's kind of how they proselytize, Anyway, people loved it. So that was a fun little creative ditty that I got to do.
That's cool.
You mentioned a life coach there. What was that, a therapist, or was that a secular person, or who was that?
The life coach?
Yeah.
She was a person from the UU that I met.
Was that a paid service?
Yeah, I paid her for her services, and she's just wonderful. She's become a really close friend just through all of our drama that we went through together.
So your impetus to hire her was driven by like, hey, I'm out a limb here. I'm out in a world that I don't really know how to navigate. What was it?
Yeah, it was mostly the big change that was happening was in my theology. And so I'm I have one foot in my Christian church and one foot in the UU, and I'm trying to navigate that and just really grappling with my feelings and just that fear of what's happening, those doubts. And she was kind of walking me through all of those steps. And then as we're going along, she's helping me to reflect on myself. And that's when I start to have questions about my own, sexuality. And then I also, the issue of my I think the marriage came first, the sexuality came later. She was just walking me through all those big things because it was for the first time I'm just starting to allow myself to process and think and reflect in ways that I had never been able to do before.
Yeah.
Great.
That's awesome.
I have one last question too.
Okay.
Where do you teach? What do you teach? Are you a high school English or middle school, or what do you teach?
I am an elementary school teacher, and I have a 3rd and 4th combination class in a really nice school district. So it's a great place to be. And I felt like it was so wonderful that I got hired because being older, and I had just been subbing for the past 10 years in this area, it was really hard to get an actual continuing contract. But the principal gave me a chance because he knew me, as a sub. And had I not gotten that employment with insurance benefits, I was pretty much screwed. And so every day, I practically kiss the ground when I walk in because I'm so grateful to have the job. And not only, does it provide for me, but it's a job I love. I'm just crazy about these kids. They are a blast.
Yeah, that's great.
So we just had a guest last week that was an alcoholic, and so that was the one episode where we couldn't talk about alcohol. But this sounds like a life that might drive you to drink. Do you have a libation of choice?
Well, I actually like vodka and tonic with lime.
Yeah,
that's kind of my go-to drink. But my tongue is really sensitive, and the acidity really hurts my tongue, so I can only have it in small doses. But whenever I want to just kind of kick back and chill for a little bit, I go for the vodka tonic. A few weeks ago, on one of those closed groups, the post-Christian people, we were all watching A Case for Christ.
Yeah.
Together. We were all watching it at the same time and commenting. It was a blast. But we all got out our favorite drinks to be able to swallow what was being said on the movie.
Right. I tried to sit in on that very thing. Yeah. I know that it was Christy Kiger's the one that set it up, I think, right. And she's a former guest of the show.
Yeah.
I couldn't get it to work, but
that's Lee Strobel, The Case for Christ.
Yeah,
right?
Well, it's based on that book. It's a movie based on the book. I guess.
It's a terrible book, and he's supposed to be some kind of journalist, and he's clearly an apologist.
Yeah, and not a good one.
No, not a very good.
So I think we're probably on the wrap up here. You have anything you want to say? Well,
I am so grateful to be able to be here and to be able to share my story. And I think outside of circles like this, it's not an easy thing to really talk about because people don't understand. And one of the things with my former relationship with Janine was that we were just completely in different places. I still had such a need to talk about all of this. I was still processing, still debriefing, but it gets really tiresome for people that aren't in it. And I realize that now. So I try to keep that separate from the rest of my life because it's just overwhelming for others. And so I just can't tell you how grateful I am to be able to say out loud some of these things that I've gone through and what I've learned along the way. And I just want to say that I've never been more happy. And truly, it is a lie that the only joy can be found in Jesus because by golly, I am experiencing joy on a whole another level. And it's wonderful. And I would just want to encourage anyone who's doubting or just questioning their faith. It's okay to have doubts. It's okay to question. There is no lightning strike that's going to, come and zap you. It's really okay.
Yeah.
I needed to hear that for myself over and over again because it's just such a scary process.
Yeah.
But as I'm through it, it really is okay. Life is good.
Great.
Well, thanks, Joy, and thanks for writing this book. Thanks for coming on and sharing your story, and we wish you the best.
Yes, we do.
Thank you so much, and thank you for all of your patience with my technology difficulties.
No,
that was
fine.
crazy.
No, not a problem in the least.
All right.
We're happy to do it. Thanks,
Well,
dear,
thank
very
you.
much. Yeah, it was great.
Have a great week.
So, Joy Hopper.
Joy Hopper, my gosh, how could you be so cheerful?
You know
With
what?
all the
I was
stuff
thinking the
that
same
she
thing.
went through, that shit, my God. And yet here she is, laughing at the strange, sad things.
And
in her life.
we're obviously an audio program.
Yeah.
She's 56 or 7.
Yeah, 56. Yeah.
Honestly, if you close your eyes, which is what
Yeah.
I'm saying, it's like, of course you can't see her face. We've seen her face, so we knew
Yeah.
what we were talking to. But I'm telling you, at times I was listening. She sounded almost like a teenager.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think the shackles are off, man. And she is a free butterfly.
Mm-hmm.
And so she's tapping into some suppressed youthful joy and energy. And I found her to be a delight and an overcomer. And because she even said dispensationally and everything that she is a Pollyanna, positive and gives everybody the benefit of the doubt. We were talking about when she contacted her biological parents, were you angry or whatever? She just doesn't.
No.
She is not embittered. And not if anybody, a lot of people have had hard lives, but she could completely justify being mad as fuck.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're mad, and we didn't
Just
even
hearing
live
the
it.
story, I get mad. Yeah. Jeez.
So anyway, I just think she's amazing.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed talking to her.
Really. Very, very nice lady. Very nice woman. Absolutely.
She mentioned something about talking to, if you make friends with lifelong atheists, and it sounds like Janine, his girlfriend of hers for a while, was a lifelong atheist.
Mm-hmm.
We, ex-Christians, kind of want to unpack this stuff sometimes. We want to talk about it. It was hard. And we need, but I think what her point was is that not everybody wants to hear it, especially in the quantity that we want to dish it.
Mm-hmm.
And so we need community, and that's why we've set up on Facebook 2 private communities. One's a Middle Tennessee group that we actually meet monthly face-to-face. The other is a private support group for everyone's agnostic listeners and guests and former guests.
All around the world.
All around the world.
Yeah.
Several continents represented there, and countries. And it's only about 250 people, but they really love one another. And I don't ever get on there. I chime in every now and then, but it is a self-propelled community that just loves talking to each other and about this very acute subject. That you could end up burning out people, that don't relate to it. And this is you and I. Here you are hearing these stories week after week. And oftentimes you say, I don't get it. Why did you sit through that? Why didn't you? I would have been gone. And if you were Joy, the first time that she touched the radio and he slapped her face, stop the car.
Yeah.
Out.
I'm gone.
That would be you.
Yeah.
But 30 years later, she finally says, stop the car.
Wow.
And that's awe-striking for you, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
Why'd you put up with that shit?
Yeah.
And it is for me, too, now that I'm looking at it from I'm delivered.
We're unshackled from these religious beliefs that have nothing to do with anything, in terms of living a good life. Anyway.
And I think this is the irony of her subtitle of her book, is she takes the rose-colored glasses off.
Right.
And the world's even more beautiful without them.
That's well said. Well said. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Great show. Great find. I hope people buy this book, Joy Hopper, Unspeakable. Joy Unspeakable is what it's called.
Yeah, good book.
By Joy Hopper.
Really well written.
And well written. She's got a real nice gift. Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, Bob.
Yeah, thank you. Well, let's do this again sometime. Maybe next week.
Let's do it.
All right.